The salt air was still that morning. Roanoke Island, North Carolina, July 3rd, 2012. The kind of summer morning that moves slow and smells like the sea and asks nothing of anyone. And somewhere on that island, in a house the press had never been able to fully reach, Andy Griffith took his last breath. By the time most of America sat down for breakfast, he was already in the ground. 4 hours, 53 minutes. No cameras, no crowds, no farewell broadcast, no network tribute with archive footage and celebrity tears and that whistled theme swelling over a slow montage. Nothing. Just a man, a patch of Carolina earth, and a silence so complete it stunned an entire country into confusion. The headlines called it bizarre. Fan forums called it a betrayal. People who had grown up watching him every single week, who had named their children after his characters, who genuinely believed they knew him, felt something close to grief. Not just at his death, at the way it happened. How could his family do this? Didn't he belong, in some real and meaningful way, to all of us? Here is what nobody told you. That burial wasn't panic. It wasn't a grieving family caught off guard and making rushed decisions in shock. It was planned, documented, researched, executed with a precision that took years to arrange. Andy Griffith did not accidentally disappear in those 5 hours. He engineered it. And to understand why, you have to understand something the cameras never captured in 50 years of trying. He was never entirely who you thought he was. Andy Samuel Griffith was born June 1st, 1926, in Mount Airy, North Carolina, a small town tucked into the Blue Ridge foothills, where mornings smelled like pine and red clay, and life moved at the rhythm of seasons, not ambition. It sounds like Mayberry because it essentially was. But the boy who grew up there was not Sheriff Andy Taylor. Not even close. His father Carl worked with his hands, carpenter and factory worker, chasing whatever work the Depression-era South would offer. No running water in the family home. No excess of anything. Not money, not space, not certainty about tomorrow. What that kind of childhood quietly teaches a person never fully leaves. It teaches you that comfort is not guaranteed, that the world owes you nothing, and that the things truly yours, you hold onto with both hands, because everything else can disappear overnight. What Andy found that could not be taken was his voice. He discovered it in church, plain wooden walls, a congregation finding something together that the weak outside had scattered. He sang before he fully understood the words, and those who heard him paused. There was something in it, warm, unhurried, rooted, not a child performing, someone who already knew where he stood. Even when everything around him said he had no reason to be sure. That voice carried him to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1944. For a boy from his background, that wasn't a natural progression. It was an act of audacious faith. He studied music, absorbed everything the institution could give a young man who had grown up with so little of it, and standing alongside students from wealthier, more connected worlds, he learned something that would guide every professional decision he ever made. Talent didn't care about your father's income. Applause didn't ask where you came from. He built a comedy act after graduation. Southern storytelling. A country boy encountering the modern world with wide-eyed bewilderment and wits so dry audiences needed a second to realize they'd been had. His monologue, what it was football sold over 800,000 copies in 1953. Overnight, the poor boy from Mount Airy had a hit record. Broadway followed. Then Hollywood moved closer. And then came the film that history somehow forgot to hold on to. Director Elia Kazan cast Andy in A Face in the Crowd. What Andy Griffith did in that film stopped people cold. He played Lonesome Rhodes, a drifter, a manipulator, a man who weaponized folksy charm to seduce the public into blind devotion, then revealed in private a contempt for the very people who loved him. Dark, layered, terrifying in its precision. Critics called it one of the finest screen debuts in a generation. He could have gone anywhere after that film, built an entire career in dramatic, morally complex work. But Hollywood flinched. The market wanted warmth. The public wanted innocence. And so when producer Sheldon Leonard approached him in 1960 with an idea about a small-town sheriff in a fictional North Carolina place called Mayberry, Andy said yes. He would spend the rest of his life quietly reckoning with that decision. The Andy Griffith Show premiered October 3rd, 1960. And from its very first episode, something happened that no network had predicted and no ratings model had anticipated. America didn't just like it. America needed it. The country was fracturing. The Cold War hummed under every headline. The civil rights movement was cracking open the comfortable illusions of American life. The country was accelerating into a future it couldn't see clearly and wasn't sure it wanted. And in the middle of all that noise, Mayberry offered something almost impossibly rare: stillness. Sheriff Andy Taylor carried no gun. He solved problems with patience rather than force. He raised his son Opie with a tenderness that fathers of that era rarely showed on screen or off it. Wise without arrogance, funny without cruelty, principled without rigidity. He was everything America wanted to believe it was. For 8 seasons, the show dominated television. It finished #1 in the Nielsen ratings during its final year, almost unheard of for a series at the end of its run. Grown adults decades later would still tear up at the sound of that opening whistle, unable to fully explain why. But here is what was happening inside all of that warmth that nobody was talking about. Andy Griffith was disappearing. Not physically, not professionally, in the way that matters most. He was being slowly replaced by the character the world needed him to be. Every stranger who approached him in a grocery store and called him sheriff, with a reverence usually reserved for the divine. Every letter addressed to Andy Taylor. Every photograph where someone put their arm around him, smiling like they were greeting an old friend. It was a slow erasure, and he felt every inch of it. Those who worked closely with him described a man of profound contradictions: generous and volatile, warm and withholding, capable of extraordinary kindness one moment and cold, cutting impatience the next. Don Knotts, his co-star and the closest friend of his professional life, once observed that Andy carried something heavy beneath the laughter, a restlessness the show's gentle pace could never fully contain. The first marriage, to his college sweetheart Barbara Edwards, collapsed in 1972 after 20 years. The pressure of fame had done its quiet, relentless work. The long absences, the impossible task of being a public treasure while remaining a private person. A second marriage lasted only 6 years. 2 marriages, 2 failures, and a man increasingly certain that the life the cameras showed and the life he actually lived were not just different. They were incompatible. He walked away from the show in 1968 at its absolute peak, stunning the industry. Most stars cling to success with both hands. Andy left, and spent the entire decade that followed paying for it. The dramatic films went nowhere. The television specials landed quietly. The public wanted only one thing. They wanted him to come home to Mayberry. He refused, and the refusal cost him years of professional exile that left marks he never fully discussed. And then in 1983, something happened that reordered everything. Andy Griffith was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare and terrifying neurological condition where the body's own immune system attacks the peripheral nervous system. The paralysis it caused was not metaphorical. It was total. He lost the ability to walk. For a man whose entire identity was built on presence, on commanding a stage and filling a screen, lying completely immobile with no certainty his body would return to him was a devastation that went far beyond the physical. He recovered, slowly, painfully, incompletely, and the illness left him with something that the comfortable years had allowed him to avoid thinking about: a very specific clarity about how he wanted to die. He had watched what happened to celebrities who died publicly, the media encampments outside hospitals, the televised memorials designed more for the networks than the families. The way grief became content, a life became a news cycle, and a human being became in death exactly the kind of spectacle they had spent their living years trying to escape. He wanted none of it. In conversations with his wife Cindy Knight, whom he had married in 1983, and who became by every account the most stabilizing presence of his adult life, Andy made his wishes clear. Not in the abstract way people speak about death when it feels distant, with the specificity of a man who had done his research and arrived at a conclusion he was not willing to negotiate. When he died, it would be private. It would be fast. It would be on Roanoke Island, where he had lived for years in a home the press could never quite reach. And it would be finished before the world had time to turn it into a show. North Carolina law permitted burial on private property under specific conditions. The permits could be processed with extraordinary speed when circumstances warranted. Andy's team had researched it carefully. His wishes were legally documented. The execution on the morning of July 3rd was flawless. Within 4 hours and 53 minutes of his death, he was in the ground on the property he had chosen. No announcement, no press release, no network tipped in advance. By the time the news reached the wider world, there was nothing left to photograph. Journalists who rushed to Roanoke Island found only an island, a shoreline, and a silence that had nothing to offer them. Ron Howard, who had played Opie as a child and remained close to Andy throughout his life, spoke quietly in the days that followed. He did not criticize the burial. He understood it completely. That was Andy. He said simply, he did things his way. The grave remains unmarked to outsiders. No coordinates on any official website. No plaque visible from any public road. Just the island, the salt air, the sound of water against a shoreline that keeps its secrets with the same quiet resolve Andy Griffith kept his. So did he do the right thing? It depends entirely on which Andy Griffith you are mourning. If you are mourning Sheriff Andy Taylor, built from public love and sustained by 50 years of public loyalty, then perhaps the hurt makes sense. That character became a shared possession, a piece of American memory that belonged not to one man, but to a nation that had wrapped itself in its warmth during its most turbulent decades. That version, the argument goes, owed his audience a farewell. But if you are mourning Andy Samuel Griffith, the carpenter's son from Mount Airy, the boy who sang in a church choir before he understood the words, the man who terrified audiences with his darkness before the industry decided it only wanted his warmth, then the burial makes not just sense, but profound aching sense. That man had been giving himself away since 1960. Every season of Mayberry was a negotiation between who he was and who the audience needed him to be. Every fan encountered a small transaction where he was asked to be a character rather than a person. Through the marriages that broke under pressure, the illness that stripped him of physical certainty, the professional wilderness of the 1970s, the slow accumulation of a lifetime spent being a symbol. What Andy Griffith wanted most was the one thing fame makes almost impossible: to be a private person, not a recluse. Just a man who could walk to his own mailbox without becoming a headline, who could sit on his porch without becoming a destination, who could die in his own bed without it becoming a broadcast. He had earned that. 50 years of earning it, one performance at a time. The people who felt robbed by that burial were not wrong to feel it, but they were mourning the loss of Mayberry. Andy was simply protecting the man who had always lived just outside its borders. Fame is a costume. Wear it long enough and people forget there is a body underneath. Andy Griffith never forgot. And 4 hours and 53 minutes after he drew his last breath on that quiet summer morning, the earth closed over him. The cameras never came. The networks never got their finale. Just the island. Just the silence. Just a man. Finally and completely himself.